of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The prayer this morning will be offered by the good delegate from Anne Arundel County.
May we pray. Dear Lord, you are almighty. You are everything. On this day, we pray for peace, for kindness, for gentleness, and for understanding. Amen.
Quorum call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. There being 123 members present, the House is now in session. The clerk will read the journal from the previous day.
Annapolis, Maryland, March the 1st, 2023.
House resolutions. Recognizing the sponsor to introduce the group.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. Today, the Women's Caucus celebrates its annual Women Veterans Day and is pleased to once more recognize the outstanding contributions of women military members. Please note ribbons worn by some colleagues represent being a spouse, or child, or grandchild of those who serve to fight for freedom and democracy. This year, our theme is focused on the need for greater mental health and suicide prevention programs. Receiving resolutions this morning are two leaders, an advocate for women veterans issues. Dr. Liz Clark served as an officer in the United States Army and is currently director of the Department of Defense Suicide Prevention Office in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. According to Veterans Administration, the rate of suicide amongst women veterans is twice that of non-veteran women. Hence, Dr. Clark's role is crucial. She is responsible for policy oversight and advocacy for suicide prevention, intervention, and post-intervention efforts, including policy, program development, and evaluation research and outreach. Her efforts support more than 2 million service members and over 2.5 million military families worldwide. Dr. Joanne Fisher is no stranger to our Women Veterans Day program and has partnered with us throughout the years. She served in the United States Navy and continues to be a very knowledgeable advocate on issues that challenge veterans nationwide. Dr. Fisher has demonstrated and maintained cooperative work relations with federal, state, and community leaders and is the founder and CEO of Women Veterans Committee United Incorporated, a nonprofit whose purpose is to address quality services, advocate, coordinate, raise awareness, and provide information to ensure needs are met for women veterans. We're also joined by former Secretary Gloria Lawler, member of the Women Legislators of Maryland, and Cassie Clark Barnes, daughter of Dr. Clark. Please welcome them.
Will the reading clerk please read the resolution in full?
Be it hereby known to all that the House of Delegates of Maryland offers its sincerest congratulations to Dr. Joanne Fisher in recognition of your 20 years of advocacy for women veterans benefits as the founder and CEO of Women Veterans United Committee Incorporated. The entire membership extends best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution to be presented on this 8th day of March 2023. Be it hereby known to all that the House of Delegates of Maryland offers its sincerest congratulations to Dr. Liz Clark in recognition of your leadership of the Defense Suicide Prevention Program for the U.S. Department of Defense to advance mental health issues. The entire membership extends best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution to be presented on this 8th day of March 2023. Oh, thank you.
I can take both these.
Clerk will read the journal from the previous day.
Annapolis, Maryland, March the 1st, 2023.
Recognizing the Deputy Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Moves to much be considered the reading of the journal.
So ordered. Petitions, memorials, and other papers. Special order calendar number 9. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 39, Effective Corporate Tax Rate Transparency Act of 2023. Favor report is amended, adopted.
Recognizing the maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do not have an amendment, but I do believe there is an amendment on the floor. Thank you.
Recognizing the minority whip.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. The amendment number is 853923.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered reading the amendment.
So ordered.
Can I ask a question before I read that, or do I need to read the amendment first?
Well, if you
Procedurally.
yeah, you can
Okay.
read your.
All right. I'll just start with a statement, then I'll read the amendment. Looking at HB 39, it appears to be a bill about transparency, and you see the word transparency is actually written in the title of the bill. So I believe in that spirit, if that is the will of this body, to expand on that. And so what this amendment does is it would require a nonprofit organization, including a labor organization located or registered to do business in the state, shall submit a report to the comptroller that identifies for immediately preceding taxable year the gross income of the nonprofit organization and the salaries of any other compensation paid to the following employees or members of the nonprofit organization: board members, officers, and managers. And again, it's all about transparency. So we have a bill that we would be requiring employers to arbitrarily, possibly identify their effective tax rate. Even though all that information has been submitted to the comptroller, submitted to the IRS, but we're going to further ask them to create some sort of onerous report and identify a line item effective tax rate. You know, on these businesses that spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on doing their taxes every year, we're going to now create one more burdensome hurdle that they have to create for the purposes of, I don't know, shaming them because they defer taxes and they reinvest in their business and they take advantage of federal tax guidelines. So what this amendment does is it just requires our nonprofits and labor unions to disclose similar information, because at the end of the day, it's about transparency. So with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to move that amendment.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through amendments, the committee removed the requirement for publicly traded corporations, and this amendment would impose a requirement that no longer falls on corporations, on nonprofits and labor organizations. So I would encourage the body to resist the amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
So this bill has been heavily amended. I don't know who was speaking. I apologize. My back is to... Oh. There you go. All right. Can you tell us what the bill does now?
The bill right now would require the comptroller's office to produce a report annually that is disaggregated, maintains the anonymity of these corporations, to provide the legislature and the general public with more transparency as to which of the largest corporations in our state are paying an effective tax rate of $0. It maintains the anonymity of the corporations, and it strikes that filing requirement because the corporations had expressed that it was an administrative burden. Again, this amendment would require nonprofit organizations and labor organizations to have that administrative burden that we removed from corporations.
Okay, but a corporation is still required to identify, formulate a report, though. There's still reporting requirements. I mean, let me say, the HB 39 still requires corporations to do something, or no?
No, the comptroller's office already has this information on file. This would just require them to report that information publicly annually.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Again, I'd like to press my amendment, and it's just for transparency. I mean, if the purpose of these sort of bills are to somehow identify or shame or put more burdensome either on the comptroller's office or on corporations, I think we should also require any nonprofits that bring in lots of money, they pay out lots of money in salaries and such. It's just in the vein, in the spirit of transparency. So again, I move the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Floor Leader.
Body, I urge you to resist the amendments based on the arguments that I previously made. Thank you.
Any further debate? Question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No. Roll call request, Madam Speaker.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will call the roll. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title?
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
You have an amendment?
No, ma'am, I voted. My button didn't work appropriately. I'm sorry. Change.
What would you like to be recorded in?
From green to red. Green to red. I apologize.
All right. Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title? Seeing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 11. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 299, Environment, Synthetic Turf, Chain of Custody, favorable report as amended, adopted.
Yes, gentleman from Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions are answered, and the committee adopted the amendments I was interested in, so thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Special order calendar number 12, House Bill 320, Maryland Longitudinal Data System, definition of student data, alteration, favorable report adopted.
Recognizing the maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since the floor leader's dad taught both of my parents at Catonsville Senior High School, all my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 13. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 535, Election Law, Ballots, Processing and Reporting Procedures, favorable report as amended, adopted.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. It is amendment number 84362. I'm sorry, that's not the right number. Hang on a sec. Amendment number 843625/1.
Amendment number 1.
Moves so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I've said before, in America, depending on what news you watch, you either think every aspect of the election is riddled with fraud, or you think no aspect of our elections has fraud. And what I think is important to know is that in America, there have been 1,422 proven instances of voter fraud, and of those, there's been 1,227 criminal convictions and 48 civil penalties. In recent years, there's been countless examples where fraud has been convicted as it relates to the fraudulent use of mail-in ballots. Now, I know because our former president talked about that a lot, people like to snarl at that term, the fraudulent use of mail-in ballots. But I think that both parties have an interest in ensuring that we don't have a system that makes it easy to cheat. Our election system, it should be hard to cheat. In New York, in 2023, there was a criminal conviction of a guy named Jason Schofield for the fraudulent use of absentee ballots. He was a Republican. In Arizona, in 2022, Tracy McKee was convicted of the fraudulent use of absentee ballots. Democrat. Arizona, Guillermina Fuentes, criminal conviction, fraudulent use of absentee ballots. I can go on and on and on. There are thousands of cases of criminal convictions because it is too easy to cheat when it comes to mail-in ballots. And we all should have an interest in making it hard to cheat. Easy to vote, hard to cheat. This amendment that's before us today actually wasn't the one I was going to offer first, but it's important. This amendment would just require that we do what is the law in the very blue state of Oregon. In Oregon, they have a law that requires signature verification. So that the signature gets checked on the mail-in ballot, and if it looks wildly off, the voter is contacted and given an opportunity to cure their ballot. That's what this amendment would do, and I move the amendment.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I'll urge you to resist this amendment. Let's take a step back and look at what this bill does. This bill essentially codifies the practice that has been in place for the last two elections. In 2020, under a state of emergency, and in 2022, by court order after the governor vetoed our adoption of similar legislation last year. Okay, so these are practices that are already in place for the Board of Elections. We're codifying this to allow them to process mail-in ballots early. Now, we've made significant progress in expanding use of mail-in ballots. That is a good thing for the voters of Maryland. It's a particularly good thing for older voters and voters with disabilities. Two of the groups who best utilize and most depend on mail-in ballots to be able to maintain their independence and private voting. Those are also two groups who are most disproportionately impacted and disenfranchised by signature verification requirements. Again, I urge you to support the voters of Maryland, support our older voters and voters with disabilities, resist this amendment. Thank you.
Gentlemen.
Same area. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mayor, I didn't know if he was getting back up. The maker of the amendment was getting back up or not. So.
Okay.
All right.
So is it me now?
Yeah, I guess so. You're standing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the floor leader please rise for a couple questions?
Good morning.
Now,
Floor leader.
Good morning. You said something there in your response there. You said minorities are disadvantaged because they can't sign their ballot? Is that what you just said?
I said older voters and voters with disabilities.
Can't sign the ballot.
Not that they can't sign their ballot, that signature verification systematically disenfranchises them.
We have a signature verification when we submit legislation, do we not?
The initials?
initial, and were asked to actually sign and provide that with the clerk court. Why would we have a different requirement here that we just wouldn't have for our voters?
We don't want to disenfranchise older voters, voters with disabilities, voters who may have trouble physically signing their signature or whose signature may have deteriorated over time.
We have older members here. I mean, and although honestly, that really wasn't the question. You didn't answer the question. I mean, we have one standard here in the General Assembly, and I would think that we would have the same standard when people actually show up to vote. Over the last couple of years, I've just noticed that the big push, at least from one side of the aisle, is voter integrity. And you would agree there is no verification at all on mail-in ballots, Craig. There is no signature verification for mail-in ballots in the state of Maryland.
So the oath must be signed, and our Board of Elections verifies that it is signed.
So if I just sign it, my name, so I'm supposed to sign my name. So if I say, just pick anybody randomly, and there's just a signature on there, there's no verification at all, correct, of the person actually filling out the ballot is the person the person that was mailed the ballot is the one that actually is filling it out and signing it. Isn't that so?
So the ballot is tracked not only by signature but by barcode. So the Board of Elections knows who the ballot was sent to and who's returning it.
So if you have a family of 6 and the ballot's mailed to their house, you have no idea whether the actual voter signed that ballot, the caregiver signed that ballot, or one member of the family filled out all 6 ballots because there's no signature verification. Isn't that so?
So when someone signs the envelope, they are signing an oath. They are signing an oath subject to perjury.
Is that oath verified?
It is already illegal to sign that oath on someone else's ballot, to sign for someone else, to impersonate a voter, or to vote under a false name. We already have strong provisions in place for voter fraud. This is an instance that has not occurred here in Maryland. We heard lots of examples from other places, but remember, this is a practice that has been used for the last 2 elections without a single known case of voter fraud or any action being taken by the state prosecutor.
So what you just heard, ladies and gentlemen, is no. There is no verification. And we have instances that it's never happened in Maryland. So I suggest if we do have an instance where it's happened in Maryland, you accept this amendment. You know, I know there's this theory out here that we can never accept an amendment from the minority party. We're not, you know, it kind of kills me. We're always saying, we're not D.C., we're not D.C. We get along in Annapolis. Well, I'm sure we'll drop hundreds of amendments, and none of them are ever selected. That's wrong. That's wrong. This is a good amendment, and we'll see what the sponsor of the amendment has to say. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker. Gentleman from Montgomery.
I just briefly wanted to get up and say that I am one of those disabled voters the gentle lady from Howard County is talking about. And as a result of my disability, my handwriting is illegible, and due to my fatigue and ongoing fine motor issues on a given day, my signature looks different. So the gentle lady is absolutely right that the good delegate from Anne Arundel's amendment would disenfranchise the voters, disabled voters, because many of us have fine motor issues. So I ask the body to resist this amendment as well. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the gentleman is correct. We do better here than we do in Washington, D.C., and I'm quite fond of the Speaker and most of you. And I do have great respect for the folks with disabilities, and And I do think it's important that we never disenfranchise them or anyone else. But they're just as susceptible to the fraudulent use of their mail-in ballot as all of the rest of us. Think about individuals that live in group homes, assisted living homes, where a large number of convictions around the country have come from because some overzealous, unscrupulous voter took their sacred right to vote away from them. And they've been convicted. They pled guilty. Republicans and Democrats do this in our country, and people do it here in the great state of Maryland. A woman named Linda Earlette Wells pled guilty in the great state of Maryland when she voted for her deceased mother. We like to think it doesn't happen, but it happens. And it is a vile thing to allow it to be easy to cheat. A woman named Elsie Virginia Schilt of Frederick, Maryland, pled guilty to attempting to vote more than once in the same election through the use of a mail-in absentee ballot. I know we like to think it's not something that we should worry about, but this is a very simple thing requiring signature verification, and the committee has made a system where you can cure your ballot. So if your signature has deteriorated or you're just feeling sloppy that day and the signatures look incompatible, you get a phone call. Under the bill, you get a text. Hey, did you really vote? Is this really you? Yes. Good. Your vote counts. So I think this is a reasonable thing. There is no examples where in Oregon this has been a problem. I think it's responsible, and I urge that we move forward with the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, we've heard firsthand from a colleague about why this amendment is so dangerous and so detrimental. I urge you to resist the amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose?
Roll call, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman supported. Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? If so, the clerk will take the call. The amendment fails, being 100 votes in the negative. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title?
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Inman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be a little quicker with this one. I have an amendment at the desk. It's an amendment number 163525/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
So I've heard the objections to the signature verification, and this amendment takes a different approach to making it hard to cheat with mail-in ballots. What this amendment would do is, on the envelope where you sign currently, by the way, that's hidden from the public view for the purpose of privacy, you would include the last 4 digits of the voter's Social Security number, which is already collected by the Board of Elections, so it can be verified. No worry about sloppy handwriting there, or chicken scratch, or deteriorated handwriting. Or the valid driver's license or state-issued identification number. Or
He doesn't like your amendment.
I was just worried it was another one of my kids. Or the voter's government-issued voter identification number, which the Board of Elections sends out. And It also retains the provisions of law that allows for curing. So if your last for your social is 1234 and you put down 1233 by accident, you're going to get a phone call, a text, some other communication, whatever it is that's allowed under the law to cure your ballot. And as long as you say, yep, that was me, your vote counts. I move the amendment.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Other than concurring with our young constituent in the gallery, I'd urge you all to resist this amendment. This is very sensitive personal information that we're asking to be shared in a form that has not been vetted. This is an interesting idea, but I don't think it's one that's appropriate to adopt on the fly on the floor. I'd ask you to resist this amendment.
Gentleman still pushing this amendment?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think this is such an important issue that I move to lay the bill over for one day for the opportunity for the committee to take a look at the issue.
Floor leader.
No. We'd ask that we resist that.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask the parliamentarian to take a look at the rule. I believe it's page 41.
Can I get clarification of what you were inquiring? I'm sorry. Oh, laid over in the rule. I just want to make sure I was hearing what you were requesting.
Yes, in our rule book on page 45.
Okay. Because I couldn't.
Rule
understand
number
what you were saying.
53 as it relates to layovers. If the request is made during the first 65 calendar days of session, a bill or resolution and the amendment proposed thereto shall lay over for one day. Now, thank you.
Okay. Is the gentleman supported?
I believe that it requires 4 individuals to stand. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Okay. The bill is laid over. To the appropriate time tomorrow. All right. Special order calendar number 14. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 547, Family Prosperity Act of 2023, favor report as amended, adopted.
Recognizing the gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so ends the extended version of Schoolhouse Rock. For the record, I am the last thing that stands between you and the marijuana. I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 553625.
Amendment number 1.
Thank you. Colleagues, this is a very simple amendment. I'm sure you've heard it before. It simply says, in order to be eligible for this income tax credit, you must be here legally. And why is that important? Because it helps all of us fulfill our sworn duty to uphold the laws of the U.S. and the Maryland State Constitution. Look, I will concede to you, we are in desperate need of hardworking, loving, God-fearing, productive people. And I concede to you, many of the people that might be cut out of this with this amendment are in that category. But what do we do here in this House? We pass laws to encourage certain behavior or discourage certain behavior. So with this amendment, what I'm doing is encouraging people to become U.S. citizens. We have bill after bill come through this House to discourage more people to do things the illegal way, and instead of encouraging them to do things the legal way. We have a Medicaid bill to provide to illegal people. Why would they then be encouraged to become U.S. citizens? It's called the path of least resistance. It is human nature. It's an absolute law. Almost all of us do things that is easy. But our moms, our grandmas, whoever raised us taught us, the easy way is not always the best way. Because there's always other factors, collateral damage. And when we encourage this type of thing, we get more of it. Look, I understand immigration's a federal thing, but if you look down on the border right now, it's the path of least resistance. Almost 5 million people across that border in the last 22 months. Most of them good people, but there's some really bad stuff going on at that border. All of the fentanyl flowing into this country is coming through that border, and it's ending up here. We have violent drug lords controlling that southern border on the other side. And with it, we have children raped, sold into sex slavery, sent here, fentanyl ending up here, violence ending up here. Once again, it's not the vast majority of these people, but we should not be creating a path of least resistance like that down there, because we have to deal with it here. We should not be incentivizing people to continue to come here illegally. We should be encouraging U.S. citizenship. Let me end with this, Madam Speaker. I am always honored to stand on this floor because of the historic nature of this building, both past and present. I know that there's some research being done, but I believe this is the largest black caucus in the country.
It is.
And here's how it's tied to that amendment. Madam Speaker, in my Health and Government Operations Committee, I have heard a reparations bill at least 5 times in the last 5 years. This is not the time nor the place to debate that, but it's probably worthy of debate. And this is why. When slavery was ended, the free slaves were not truly U.S. citizens. We all have read our history books. 2/3 vote. Were they granted true freedom and all the U.S. had to offer underneath the Constitution? No. A 100-year battle ensued, demanding we get treated as true U.S. citizens. Was it the path of least resistance? No. But we can all agree, I don't care what side you're on reparations, nobody can deny it was tough, and it still rages a little bit today, demanding you treat us like U.S. citizens that the U.S. Constitution guarantees. Well, what do we do with this amendment? If it's not passed, we say no. We're going to take the easy way. We're going to take the path of least resistance and give away other people's money because it's easy to do and it makes us feel good. With that, Madam Speaker, I ask to support this amendment.
Madam Speaker.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I would ask you to reject this amendment. First of all, to the maker of the amendment, thank you for the courtesy of sharing the amendment in advance. I do appreciate that. Let me first just say there is no direct pathway to citizenship here for people who are undocumented immigrants, but let's set that aside in terms of what the amendment actually says, who it impacts, and how it be administered. debate. So first of all, there is no way to know currently for our comptroller's office who is an undocumented immigrant. The comptroller's office does not have that information currently. Neither does the IRS. And I'll say for the benefit of our colleagues who are new and who are not here for the debate 2 years ago, someone filing their taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number, an ITIN, does not mean that they are undocumented. It is simply anyone who is not eligible for a social security number or, in fact, is waiting to get their social security number. So ITIN tax filers include a range of immigrants of different legal statuses, including undocumented immigrants, but as well as immigrants who have legal status to be in the United States. So simply the fact that a tax return is filed using an ITIN number is not an indication that the person is undocumented or that their family is undocumented. So our tax authorities just simply do not have that information currently. Now I can go into all the details of what this would look like going forward, how administratively burdensome it would be for the comptroller's office, how expensive it would be, and actually lead to fewer people decreasing filing their taxes. But let me just raise another point here, that the amendment before us doesn't just impact adults who are undocumented immigrants. It in fact would cut out their families who are of mixed status. And that is the case for many, many immigrant families in Maryland and in America. In fact, when you look at the children of undocumented immigrants, 80% of them, 4 out of 5 kids who have a parent who is undocumented, are themselves US citizens. So we'd be cutting a number of US citizens out of these tax credits if we adopted this amendment. And it's for those reasons that a number of other states, a growing number of other states, include all ITIN filers in both their state earned income tax credit as well as their state's child tax credit. At this point, there are 6 other states, and there'll be 2 more joining this year that include them in their EITC credit, and there are 7 other states that include all ITINs in their child tax credit. And we also see this at the federal level. The federal child tax credit, anyone, whether they have a social security number or an ITIN, that taxpayer can file for the federal child tax credit. And that's true for at least 5 other tax credits that are targeted to families with children. So for all of those reasons, I would urge the body to reject this amendment.
Gentleman still pushing his amendment?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, I still push my amendment.
On the amendment, question for the House is adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for 3rd reading. Special order calendar number 15. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 556, Cannabis Reform. Favor report as amended, adopted.
Recognizing the minority leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the special order. I do have an amendment at the desk, actually one of 2 that I'll offer in sequence. The amendment number is 693525/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're doing something with the implementation of recreational cannabis that is somewhat radical. And radical is a loaded term in our political discourse today. Radical implies that we're extremists, we're far to the left, we're far to the right. That's not what I'm implying at all. I'm using the word radical in the context of it's something that likely very few people in this chamber or very few people in this country 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago would have thought possible. We are legalizing a substance that is federally illegal. We understand that. We are creating a regulatory framework where a substance that for most of us in our life we've understood subjected you to criminal prosecution and the trafficking in was often conducted by large criminal organizations. We're making it something analogous to a liquor store or a cigarette store or a pharmacy, something we've all been familiar with since we've been children, different levels. That is a somewhat radical idea. It is a somewhat radical step. And I don't mean, again, radical that it's wrong or radical that it's to the polar extremes politically. I mean that it's radical in the sense that it's something that is so such a deviation from the way things have normally been conducted
that we have to be very careful about how we do it, that we don't produce unintended consequences. Because when you do something that no one has ever done before in our state, some states have implemented it, you have to be careful in the beginning days that you're making sure that everyone is protected, that you have not created a problem that you did not foresee or that you did not calculate correctly about. The amendment that I have that is offered currently before all of you for your consideration is designed to protect employers, businesses, small businesses, construction companies, retailers, the wide panoply of businesses that exist from potential liabilities that they may incur. And I can tell you, most of you know, I practice law, and I can tell you that one of the most significant concerns that small and mid-sized employers have, people that do not have corporate counsel, people that do not make millions and millions of dollars a year and don't have Fortune 500 law firms on speed dial, one of the major concerns that they have is, I don't want to get sued. I don't want to do anything to get sued. I don't understand. I don't want to get sued by my employees because it is costly and it causes problems within my operation. I don't want to get sued by third parties because my employee did something wrong that I didn't want them to do. I don't want to get sued. Now, you know, I don't have a huge problem with people getting sued one way or the other because that's how I make my living. But at the end of the day, the simple truth is this. People want to avoid liability. That doesn't make them bad people. They want to take reasonable concrete steps and have reasonable guidelines to avoid liability. This bill, as it was originally drafted, contained language which allowed employers to continue to implement drug-free workplace policies, drug testing for their employees. It enabled them to say, hey, listen, it's legal for you to now use cannabis, but you can't use it in a way that negatively impacts our business, our workplace. You can't use it while you're here. You can't use it maybe right before you come. You can't use it to such an extent or a degree that you could potentially cause a problem for our business, because our business is bigger than just you and your right to use cannabis. Our business provides jobs to your neighbor. Our business provides services to our community. Our business provides retirement plans for many, many people. And I don't want to jeopardize any of that because of your now lawful right to use cannabis. Go ahead and use it. But if you work for us, you have to do it within a certain envelope of reasonableness. And the amendment simply says that nothing in this new radical, I hope you understand the meaning of the word as I'm using it, in this new radical system that we're adopting, nothing may be construed to prevent or prohibit any employer from denying employment or a contract to an individual or disciplining any employee or a contractor for testing positive for the presence of cannabinoids or cannabinoid metabolites in the urine, blood, saliva, breath, hair, or other tissue or fluid of the employee's or contractor's body if the test was conducted in accordance with the employer's established drug testing policy. Here's the problem. I was privileged, I was happy to be asked by the speaker to participate in the work group, task force, whatever we called it, on marijuana legalization, along with the chair of the Economic Matters Committee and many others here. And one of the things we learned, and one of the fundamental problems that I think we all need to be honest about, there is not a medically accepted scientific test for cannabinoids, for THC, for marijuana presence in your system that correlates to the test that we're all familiar with alcohol. There's not. We're all familiar. You drink alcohol, you take a test, whether it's a blood test, a urine test, you blow in a little machine for DWI and it comes out with a scientific number, and we have determined as a body what that scientific number means in terms of you're intoxicated or not. You can drink a glass of wine and not be intoxicated. There is no such similar test for THC level. And I understand where this is difficult for people who will say, well, gee, I'll be forced to take a test, and I may test positive for THC because I used over the weekend, and I got tested on Monday or Tuesday, and now my employer says, hey, that's our policy, you test it. But there is a degree of personal accountability that goes along with being a member of our civil society. If you have chosen to take a job and take a position, some of these positions are in industries where we wouldn't want people under the influence of marijuana at any time. If you have chosen to take that job and that's how you're providing for yourself, for your family, for the roof over your head, and your employer reasonably says, hey, we have this testing policy, you're aware of it, you may not be somebody who can use marijuana. Even though you have the legal right to, as a citizen, you may not be someone who has the legal right to use it while working for our company. And that's a choice that you have to make. Many employers won't ask you to do that, and that's fine too. But I will tell you that the business community, which I think sometimes is undervalued here. I know it's not undervalued by my friend and colleague, the chair of the Economic Matters Committee. I know that he tries to accommodate and balance concerns of the competing communities. But I think in this case and on this amendment, we made a mistake in taking this language out. And I think we need to put it back in. And I can tell you, the Maryland Asphalt Association, the Chamber of Commerce, the Retailers Association, the Building and Contractors Association, the National Federation of Independent Business, the Maryland Motor Truck Association, and on and on. Wide variety of groups that literally represent thousands of businesses that employ tens of thousands of your constituents in this state and provide a heavy dose of our tax base that we use to fund all the wonderful things we try to do here, have suggested that it's very important to them, that they're not against cannabis. They're not against any of this. They're just saying we have to have the ability as employers to maintain our drug testing and our drug-free workplace programs that we've had in place forever. We've had these in place. You know why I've had them in place forever? Because it was illegal. Because it's still illegal under federal law, as we all understand. And what they have said is the use of drug-free workplace policies, drug screening during a hiring process, and drug testing during workplace accidents, think about that, during workplace accidents, could be called into question, creating enormous confusion and liability for Maryland's job creators. We must stress that Maryland businesses simply want access to the tools and protocols they're already using to keep themselves, their employees, and their customers safe. And when they say safe, what they mean is this. There are studies that exist that say that workers that test positive for cannabis had 55% more industrial accidents than those who did not, 75% higher rates of absenteeism, and 85% more workplace injuries than employees who tested negative. I can suggest to you that that makes sense, because I bet that the numbers are the same if you were an intoxicated employee by alcohol. And I have said often in this debate about where we're going with cannabis that I wish people could come out clearly and say, what is it? Is it analogous to alcohol? Then let's treat it the same way we treat alcohol. Is it analogous to cigarettes? Let's treat it the same way we treat cigarettes. Is it analogous to prescription medications that's being used for medicinal purposes? Then let's treat it the same way we treat pharmaceutical products in our marketplace. But we're not doing that. We're picking and choosing. When it suits us, we treat it like alcohol. When it doesn't suit us, we treat it like cigarettes. When it suits us, we treat it like a medicine. When it doesn't suit us, we treat it like something else. And so what I would subject to you is no one in this body would vote for a bill that says that an employer has to allow someone who comes to work smelling of alcohol with any degree of slurring to their words or signs of alcohol intoxication, and we have to let them work their shift. Whether they're on the floor of a factory, whether they're a bank teller, whether they're a nurse, no one would vote for that and say, well, we can't infringe on your right to drink alcohol. You can drink alcohol. It's legal. And your employer says you can't have it at work. You can't have any indication of it at work. And the only way I can do that is through a test, and the test says you got alcohol, you can't be here. But we're going to potentially allow that for marijuana if we don't include this language back in the amendment. And that's all we're seeking. I hope that the body seriously considers the amendment. It's offered in good faith on behalf of people, job creators, who are not looking to impede the law. They are looking to be good partners under the law and achieve the desired objectives that we're looking for. And with that, Madam Speaker, I would move the amendment, certainly subject to comments from the floor leader.
Chairman of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I would extend my appreciation to the minority leader's economy of words. I kept waiting for the timer to go off, but apparently it wasn't, so thank you. To be very clear, Maryland is a right to hire state. And just like you quoted your alcohol, I think near the end of your speech, you talked about alcohol in the workplace. That right conferred to the employer is not written in any of our alcohol laws. It's just there. And this changes nothing. What we are not doing with this bill is creating a protected class of people for those that consume cannabis. They get no special treatment. This does not change the employee-employer relationship. Employers are still allowed to test, to protect their employees, protect their customers in the way that they see fit, because they're the ones that pay the insurance, and as you said, they're the ones that are going to be sued. This does not stop them from doing that. This is a licensing bill. The reason that was taken out is because we're here to license and get this structure up and running. It's not a bill conferring any rights to an employee or redefining rights for an employer. It's specifically here to create a cannabis licensing structure, which is why we narrowly tailored it. As I stated, there is nowhere in any of the alcohol legislation or bills that say anything about an employer being able to send someone home because they're slurring or because they smell of alcohol, or requiring them to give a test on what could be considered, what's considered a legal substance before they send them home. That is already established law. This does not change that. This does not stop an employer, if they believe that their employee is consumed an intoxicant, from sending them home or just terminating them. Like I said, they don't even have to give a reason. We're not here to create a protected class of people. This bill does not do that. I believe that the majority leader is quite confused to think that somehow, although we didn't have to specify that for alcohol, we do now have to specify it for cannabis. We don't. This is a licensing bill. This is what we're doing for this bill. Again, there is no protected class. We are a right to hire state. Everything that every worry that you've discussed is already addressed in law, and this does nothing to change that. For those reasons, I ask you to resist the amendment. Thank you.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that, but then I would suggest if all it's doing is providing clarification for something that you're saying in the legislative record is going to happen anyway, then why did we take it out of the bill? Then why can't we leave it in the bill? And I guess my point would be, you said, well, I show up, an employee shows up, and I think that they smell somewhat like they've used cannabis in recent times, and I can just fire them immediately. I just say, hey, at-will employee, you're fired. I smelled the cannabis on you. I can guarantee you that a fairly high percentage of the time, decent amount of time, that's going to result in an employment lawsuit. They're going to call up a lawyer that you can find on the back of a telephone book, and that lawyer is going to say, hey, we can sue them. They fired you because they said that you smelled a little bit like marijuana, but you used the marijuana a day and a half earlier, and maybe you just hadn't had a chance to change your jacket, or you hadn't made it home to get the smell out of your hair, or whatever it was, and they fired you wrongfully. And maybe you're right. Maybe the employer will win. Maybe they will. But the employer will spend $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 fighting the lawsuit. That if we just passed the amendment, left the language, I believe the language is the language that the original bill drafter had. Like, I didn't create the language. The language was in the bill and was taken out of the bill in the committee amendment process at the very end. If we just left that in there, then we have complete clarification. Nobody has a concern. Nobody has an issue, and we move forward. And so sometimes I think we do things that it's like, you're right, maybe it's redundant, maybe it's unnecessary. So what? We're doing something that is radical, and an important community in our state, the business community, has said to give us some clarity, to give us some lack of heartburn about it, would you just leave this language in so that we can tell all of our employers, hey, we're protected, don't worry about it, life goes on? Why not just do that for them? And with that, again, subject to any further comments, I would move the amendment, Madam Speaker.
Madam Chairman. On the amendments, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Gentlemen supported? Okay. Clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Recognizing the minority leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Amendment 983724/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
This amendment is even simpler and is in the exact same vein. I'm going to read it to you. This title may not be construed to authorize an individual to operate, navigate, or be in actual physical control of a motor vehicle, an aircraft, a boat, and here's the key words, or machinery while under the influence of cannabis. I suspect that my friend is going to say, we don't need this. Of course, if you're under the influence of cannabis, you can't do these things. And if that's the case, then why not say that clearly and plainly so that no one will have any concern? If it's not the case, and that's my fear, is that when we amend things, we take out the words machinery in the committee process, we take out the wording of the last amendment. There has to be a reason to take things out that used to be there. Has to be a reason. And I think the reason may be we're concerned as to what the ultimate outcome is going to be. All this amendment effectively does is it just restates a simple principle of what should be the law and the common sense of Maryland. Because we are making recreational marijuana legal, because we're going to let people, in many cases, walk down streets and smoke pot, because we're going to let people pop edibles at lunch, because we're going to let you ride in your car while someone may be consuming cannabis in some form or another, we're still blatantly telling you you cannot operate motor vehicles, which is in there, aircraft, which is in there, obviously, machinery. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a factory before. I've been in a few factories for a few different reasons before. I've been in factories sometimes for industrial death accidents where they do investigations. And let me tell you something. Somebody screws up on a piece of very simplistic machinery that you think it's just hitting a button and turning a screw and doing whatever, and that person's not paying attention, or that person's high, or that person's on some type of medication, or that person was drunk. People die. People die. People get maimed. Sometimes they kill and maim themselves through their own negligence. That's all we're trying to say. Just add the word machinery back in so that people feel clear that, hey, we're making pot okay. You can use it. You can use it anytime you want. You can use it as much as what you want. It's legal. But there's still a very clear prohibition on using it in this context. I have no idea why we can't all just agree to say that, other than the legislative process that we enshrine here of like, well, the committee didn't do it or the committee did that. It's really simple. You're basically voting against including the word machinery in a prohibition on the use of marijuana. I think we can do that together and just move on. And with that, I'd move the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I take it from the closing statement there that we're all in agreement that everything but the word machinery is already in established case law. Transportation Law 21.902 C and D. So we can all agree that it's illegal to drive while you're intoxicated on substances, including marijuana. So I guess what the speaker, the mover of the amendment is trying to say is he wants the word machinery, however broad that may be, whatever that may entail, being a, I guess we do it from a scientific argument, any two moving parts becomes a machine. Again, we're stretching here. There's nothing in this article that says that you can do these things, but that the word machinery is so vague. Just on that alone, I would ask that we reject it, because that could mean anything. And we're not saying you can or can't operate machinery, because again, that could be your TV remote, that could be a pinwheel at home. I'm not really sure where the maker of the amendment is trying to go. At first, I thought it was public safety when he was talking about operating vehicles. But machinery is everything from stuff at work, at home, in your bathroom. Again, I don't think we want to start really going that in depth as to what we're going to regulate or not regulate. We stayed silent on it because it's very, very vague. What he's presenting is very vague, and for those reasons alone, I would ask that we go ahead and reject this amendment.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Listen, come on. Come on. I'm not talking about your electric razor that you're using at your house as machinery. I'm not talking about opening your refrigerator. I mean, I guess you could construe that as machinery, but that's not rational. And that's not how courts or employers or anyone else would interpret the bill. I could go through the process that my friend from, I guess, Anne Arundel County did and request that it be laid over, and we could amend the amendment to add the word industrial machinery to it. If that would make people feel better, we could do that. But I don't think that you'd accept the amendment anyway. And so what I would suggest to you is we're creating a legislative record here on the floor, and I'll say very clearly into it, the purpose of machinery is industrial machinery. It's machines used in employment context. It's heavy machinery. It's equipment. These are common sense things. And for whatever reason that it was taken out, the word was originally in the bill and then taken out at near the last minute before committee voting, I don't really know. But I think that we would be best served to work together in a common sense way to just adopt these things and to move forward. People of good faith will interpret these things correctly, and it won't be a problem. But when you have these business communities coming in over and over again saying, hey, we just have these simplistic, we just want these things addressed so that we can move forward. Why we wouldn't do that, to me, is a disservice. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the amendment.
Chairman.
And briefly, I'll just say this, colleagues, for those of us who have been here a little while, interpretation becomes a dangerous thing. What he may have meant is not necessarily how it's going to be, quote unquote, interpreted. And to be very clear, words have meaning. What we do, what we put into law, it has meanings. The words we choose are very specific. We do them for a reason. This is just too vague. It's very hard to understand. I guess after this discussion, I understand that we're now talking about what what my colleague would consider industrial, or not at home unless you have a work at home. Again, it's so vague that it becomes pretty much impractical. Words have meaning. This is too vague, and for those reasons, I do ask that we reject this amendment. Thank you very much.
Minority Leader.
I'd just like to move the amendment, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No. Roll call, Madam Speaker.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Recognizing the gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have an amendment at the desk. It is 653821.
Amendment number 1.
So what this amendment will also do is clarify undefined language that's in the bill as it relates to local control. And here we're talking about two terms that are vague, actually. And if we eliminate a couple lines in the bill, it'll actually clarify and also prevent some of our municipalities and our counties potentially, it'll keep them out of court. A lot of us, we come from local government, whether it's towns or county, and I know that I'm not the only one in the room that gets a couple questions often where, what do you like better, state government, or would you rather be a local elected official? And they're completely different. I don't have a real good answer to that. One of the benefits of being at the state level is the fact that you're not in the weeds. You're not in there talking about things like roadway setbacks, advertising, trash, and that sort of thing. And the reason why our government is set up the way it is that those folks who are closest to their communities are the ones that are making most of the decisions. And when it comes to where these dispensaries are going to be located, those decisions should be left up to the closest to the folks who are making decisions that are closest to the people. And they also have resources that we don't have here at the state. They have planning commissions. They have boards of zoning appeals. They have folks who know local law, they know state law, that's going to treat every single situation that's unique in its own special way. What this bill does, it's a one-size-fits-all across the entire state of Maryland. And the two words that are unclear is reasonable and unduly burdensome. And what the bill does, the reason why the way the bill is written, and it's going to put potentially our municipalities and our counties in these legal contests, is that on page 48, the bill specifies that a local jurisdiction may establish reasonable zoning for cannabis businesses. I'll read that again. Establish reasonable zoning for cannabis businesses. If I were to read that, it sounds like they have control at the local level, right? But if you turn over to one more page, on page 49, it says, local jurisdiction may not establish zoning or other requirements that are unduly burdened, that could unduly burden a cannabis licensee. Now, those two terms that I was referring to, unduly burden and the two terms reasonably yeah, I got it. Those two terms I was just referring to, unduly. So they're subjective terms. that the only way that we're going to be able to clarify those terms is if a licensee thinks that it was an unduly burden, that they're going to have to end up taking it to court. And like the amendment that was just given, more likely the local jurisdiction will probably win in those court cases. But the problem is they're going to spend an awful lot of money in order to be able to do it. And to be quite honest, our local elected officials, they're there for a reason. They're directly accountable to the public. And that's the reason why we have our planning commissions. That's the reason why we have our boards of zoning appeals to be able to make these sorts of decisions. Because I don't know that we would want any of our dispensaries near our schools. I don't know that we would want any of our dispensaries near child care providers. And so each situation should be dealt with its, again, with its unique characteristics, and those decisions should be made at the local level. So I move the amendment.
Chairman.
Madam Speaker, body asks you to reject this amendment. I've said this a multitude of times, and I'll say it one more time, that the goal of this bill was not to get Marylanders high, but to get rid and eliminate the illicit drug market, stop young men from dying and going to jail for cannabis. In order to do that as a state, we have to move forward as one as a state. So if we start getting different areas that say, we don't want this, not here, we don't want it in this area, when we create these vacuums, it's going to be filled. And that's my overall concern, is when the certain people say, but not in my backyard. Well, somebody's going to fill that market. They're doing it now. And if you got to drive 20 or 30 minutes to a dispensary because your locality doesn't like dispensaries, well, that's a problem. The reason we put this definition there is because we want them to honestly work with the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission when they're putting out these zoning issues. Of course, schools aren't an issue, but you know what's an issue? Saying you have to be within 300 feet of a doctor's office before you can open up a dispensary. That's currently what certain jurisdictions are doing. That's onerous. We want to make sure that this is spread, this is fair. We want to make sure that we don't have a patchwork of laws throughout the state. We want to avoid favoritism because somehow, depending on the jurisdiction you live in, some of the smaller jurisdictions, certain people tend to get taken up, get a little favoritism. Certain relatives get a little favor, and they're able to get a store where you're not for some off-colored reason. But the most important reason that I am trying to do my best to make sure that it is fair and equitable across the board is because I know what happens when we let the locals get involved, let's say with liquor stores. Now, where'd they all end up? Because, see, that's the problem. They have weird zoning regulations that said, no, not where I live. I just want to stop on the way home and get beer. But I don't want it where I live, but it can be where other people live, other communities live. In the African-American community, there's always a running joke. On every block, you're going to find two things, a church and a liquor store. So our goal is to make sure that these zoning regulations don't put that same thing going on with cannabis, to make sure that it's evenly spread out as the state sees it, the way we do it through the population, that it doesn't get shoved in our neighborhoods where people can come and pick it up and drive home, because where they live, they have a different jurisdiction. They have different zoning rules where they live. But where we live, it's free game. That's the most important reason. We want this throughout the state. We don't want to create any vacuums. We don't want to create any holes. We don't want to create any disparities. And I don't want to have to live next to something that you don't have to live next to. This should be fair for everyone. For all these reasons, I ask that you oppose this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Talking about favoritism, really? I mean, how often does the state tell the local jurisdictions where and when and how they can put certain industries? We don't do this for anything, whether it's tech, medical, nothing. We don't tell the local jurisdictions in any other industry except for cannabis where they should put these facilities. And we don't strip any other industry, or we don't strip the local government out of the decision-making process for any other industry across the state except for cannabis. Folks, that's the pinnacle of favoritism right there. That's the pinnacle of favoritism, and it's wrong.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the gentleman from Montgomery.
Chairman of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I think it's important for me to push back on this perception that state law doesn't micromanage certain aspects of business regulation. We have an entire suite of laws to protect the Chesapeake Bay which involve precisely this kind of regulation. It is not unique. What is being done in this bill is not unique in the state of Maryland, and I would simply want to say to you, if you want to vote against the bill because you disagree with it, of course you're free to do that, but do not be misled into believing that this is somehow unique or, to quote the words of the minority leader, radical.
Minority Leader.
I had a question for the floor leader. Does the state of Maryland, all of the alcohol laws, at least to my understanding, which your committee governs, are state laws. So you can't make a local alcohol law. We have state laws that pertain differently for different counties. My understanding of how that works, at least in my time of being here, I've been a county delegation chair for pretty much all that time, is that if my county wants a particular liquor law, and they have different licensing schemes than what, say, Charles County has, or Charles County is different than my county, you come to this body, it becomes a matter of state law, and those localities are able to adopt their own, not their own, through state law, they're able to implement their own ideas to a large extent about how alcohol will be sold, where it will be sold within their own county. Is that fairly correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that's, I guess, my question, and I think the gentleman from the Eastern Shore's point, and it goes back to what I said before, why don't we treat this like alcohol? Why don't we say, if Charles County says this is where we want to have dispensaries, this is the type of dispensaries we want to have, we're allotted so money under the state licensing scheme for our population, and this is how we want to do it, why don't we work together with the localities and able to do that? Every place is not the same. Every area is not appropriate for this activity. And I don't understand the concept of we don't want a concentration. We're saying it's a good activity. We're saying we want to bring this industry to Maryland. We want to get it out under the light, and it's a great thing. But we're also saying, like, well, we don't want a concentration of it to come this place or that place. And we don't want to treat it like alcohol. To my knowledge, the state of Maryland does not tell Montgomery County or Allegheny County or Harford County, this is where your liquor stores have to be. We've given you the right to have so many liquor licenses in Harford County, and the state of Maryland is going to usurp potentially the local ability to control where they get placed. And I think that all this is trying to do is treat it the same way. And I appreciate my colleagues' complaint. It just seems like this is becoming, you know, there's a thing in contract law called most favored nation clauses, that no matter what happens in any other contract in the world, you get the best deal. And it seems to me that's what cannabis has become. No matter what happens, you get a better deal than cigarettes, you get a better deal than cigars, you get a better deal than pharmaceuticals, you get a better deal than beer, you get a better deal than wine, you get the best deal. And all we're trying to do is say, treat it like everything else. I appreciate the gentleman's amendment. Thank you.
Chairman.
I kind of said it before, but I'll say it again. Yeah, we're trying to avoid all that. What you just talked about with the alcohol, that's what I was just talking about with on every block in the hood. That's what we're trying to avoid. We don't want that to happen again. We don't want, because you're arguing my point. Yeah, we saw what happened with alcohol. We saw what happened when the locals had their right to do it. And I drive through Waldorf, I'm like, wow, look at all the liquor stores where my people live. That's coincidental. As soon as you bleed out a little bit, you don't see any. Yet we've seen what the local alcohol bills are doing. We see how they're concentrated. And make no mistake, we're not saying that having a bunch of dispensaries in your neighborhood is good. We're saying that there's a financial benefit to legalizing this market. We're not saying that we want them all right near us. We're saying that they should be evenly spread out. But you just demonstrated my point. The way that we've done our alcohol laws has forced a lot of these alcohol businesses into the minority communities. I do not want that to happen again, which is specifically why we put this bill in this way, to make sure, and to be clear, we're not telling these individuals where they can put them. We're just saying be reasonable, don't be onerous. I'm not understanding the disconnect between putting some guardrails up versus what you're hearing is, we'll tell you where to put them. That's not what the law says anywhere. You have a decision-making process. You have zoning regulations and rules. If you don't want them near a school, near a dance studio, near a babysitter or daycare, that's fine. Just don't be onerous. Don't treat them disparately than other like-minded businesses. That is all we're trying to do. But because of alcohol, we want to make sure it gets done fairly. Because of what you just described with the alcohol, we want to make sure that we don't repeat those same mistakes, because it is very hard to unring those bells and pull those out of our communities. So the best way to prevent that oversaturation, don't put them in there in the first place. So again, I ask that we resist the amendment.
Gentleman from East Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand to support my colleague's amendment. And, you know, coming from local government, I can tell you that there's no better view of zoning than the local authorities. You know, you have local boards, like local appeals boards. They know the properties, they know the people, they know those situations probably better than anyone when it comes to that particular area. You know, it's 141 of us right here. We come from 141 different places in the state, but you know, our perspective from where we live is important into any discussion. And Senator Miller, when I first got elected, I came to Annapolis and I was talking to him. He said, you know, Delegate, the biggest problem we have over here is understanding one another's districts. And I've never forgotten that, because I think it's important to understand that our local perspective is important in any discussion, and especially when it comes to something as of this nature in our local homes. You know, I don't say that all local government is opposed to this. They may or may not be, but I think that authority certainly needs to be at the local level. And over on the shore, you know, we've been hit by a lot of these solar farms that have wanted to come into our areas, and the county governments have opposed them, and local zoning has opposed them, and the PSC overrides all of it, and the projects get put in anyway. And I can tell you, it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth when you have all these things set in place, and Big Brother, so to speak, comes in and overrides the project. And I'm just afraid that that's what we're talking about in this particular instance. And again, I stand in support of the amendment and to keep the zoning local. Thank you.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's really a simple request. Let's define what reasonable or unduly is. If we can do that, at least it gives some direction to our local governing bodies as to what decisions they should make or what they shouldn't make. And by defining those two terms, it will also keep these situations out of court. And it seems like it's a real simple thing to do. I mean, I don't know if we can go back to the committee and actually write definitions as to what our intent is when it comes to reasonable or unduly. I don't know if that's an option or not that this body can do. And I think if we can actually define what those two terms are, it'll make things certainly a lot more settling for most of us. And I press the amendment, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title?
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Hartford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a quick question for the floor leader.
Yes, sir.
Committee.
Thank you. In the bill, it talks about consumption licenses. Can you please define what the bill intends for those?
Well, it's a framework basically for, at a later date, obviously we're not giving them out right away, to allow individuals to be able to come and consume cannabis in a safe location. That's set up almost like a business. And at this point, it's laid out where they can't have any, they can't sell liquor, they won't be able to sell cannabis there, things of that nature. And again, it's I'm not gonna say, we've set the framework out for something to come later.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 873-425-1.
Amendment number 1.
So much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
So, colleagues, when this bill's been crafted and when the voters of Maryland voted to legalize cannabis in Maryland, and the debates about this for the years leading up to this, the conversation really stemmed around, in large part, a safe way to legalize cannabis so you can smoke it in the privacy of your home. this portion of the bill rails against what I believe is that intent. What the consumption licenses would allow for is basically a bar where you can go out and consume, smoke weed, eat edibles, whatever the case may be, that you have to travel to, get high, travel home from. The rub is the distance between your home, this weed bar, and your house, right? We've obviously put loads of laws in place around alcohol, right? And we have lots of ways to what the minority leader was discussing earlier to measure and to regulate if someone is at an unsafe level of intoxication to operate a motor vehicle. However, we don't have that ability when it comes to cannabis, right? And remember, this isn't the dirt weed of your parents. This isn't even the kind weed of our generation. This is genetically engineered, powerful cannabis that it takes very little to put somebody in a state where it's unsafe for them to operate a motor vehicle. Obviously, the bill addresses the ability to operate a motor vehicle. But the issue is the ability to enforce that, right? Those of you know I was a military policeman in the Marine Corps. I pulled many DUIs in my career, right? And the attorneys in here, many of them know the process even better than me. Pull somebody over, identify they may be intoxicated, but through a variety of mechanisms, perform field sobriety test, sometimes a horizontal gaze and stagnus, which is an eye test, and then you give a PBT. And that PBT is a pretty accurate mechanism to figure out exactly are they in compliance or outside the law, right? And then you can prosecute them and go through the process. And that's a great deterrent because the amount of work somebody has to go through if they are convicted or even charged with a DUI. Ad campaigns, advocacy groups, nonprofits all have come together over decades to enforce and push these laws. We do not have any mechanisms in place to do that for people driving a motor vehicle. And so when you look at the sum of the amendments that have been resisted today, machinery is not definitive enough. But for zoning, onerous is absolutely definitive enough. I think those two things compete with each other. So when you look at the sum of some of the concerns that the minority party has, when you take away local zoning control, that's still not very defined. Now, the state can decide in your community where this can go. So maybe you can't go 1,000 feet from a school, but maybe you can go 1,020 feet from a school. And they live on the other side of the school. So now, in the paint a little picture, I drive to one of these weed dens, and there's lazily strewn about Taco Bell and Mountain Dew and Doritos all over the place. And I go and I consume some of this very, very powerful cannabis. And now I'm already in a position of bad judgment. Do I take an Uber? Do I ride a bike? Or do I do what sometimes people do, unfortunately, and hop in my vehicle and drive past that school to my house? And I'm not saying somebody who's consuming this is going to go drive the Daytona 500. But when a kid's jumping out of the road, they might be a second too late in hitting that brake. A little bit slower in approaching, they may be a little slower in reaction in trying to stop for another vehicle. That is the concern. And if they do, we don't have any legitimate mechanism to determine if they are driving under the influence of marijuana. Yeah, there are some law enforcement officers that are drug recognition experts, but that adds an entire additional level of onerous evaluations on individuals inside the road, and that is not even a completely foolproof science. So to literally create opportunities for people to drive under the influence of marijuana, powerful marijuana, with no mechanism to figure out if they are driving under the influence. And we are years away from any legitimate technology to be able to do this. To include it in this bill, this is a bill for another time once we have the technology. To include it in this bill, I think, is a massive mistake. And so what this amendment does, it strikes any language in this initial bill dealing with consumption licenses. So with that, I'd move the amendment. Thank you.
Recognizing the Vice Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I appreciate the maker of the amendment sharing with the amendment prior to. I want to remind everybody that this just simply lays a foundation for how this framework is going to look. Second, if we don't have this permitting system in place, certain local jurisdictions, like we have just recently seen in another jurisdiction, could set up a shop or approve a shop that, frankly, is not authorized, and somebody could invest all their time, all their money into something that we're not approving, and we don't have any oversight or regulations around, and there could be a conflicting laws around that. And so we want to create one system across the board. Second, I think it was touched on with the minority leader's previous amendment. We have the transportation article, which has the DUWI enforcement. And then there's field sobriety tests done all the time where, you've seen people walk in straight lines or the cops flashing their flashlights into somebody's eyes looking for any kind of impairment. Last, I would turn everybody to page 50, and if you read lines 12 to 15, an on-site consumption establishment may operate only if the county and, if applicable, the municipality where the business is located have issued a permit or license that expressly allows the operation of the off-site consumption establishment, meaning they have to opt in. So there's already an opt-in for that. And the last thing I would just say is that there is a study that will be done. There are no licenses for on-site consumption in round one. That doesn't happen until round two. And so we're going to study it to make sure that there are safeguards, make sure that there are restrictions, they're properly operating, and there are safeguards from people getting to and from so that we hear all the concerns before we issue these licenses. And for those reasons, I would ask the body to reject this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A couple things to clarify on there. So first and foremost, there is no mechanism and there's no technology coming in the near future that can measure someone's BAC, or blood alcohol content, but I guess it would be blood THC content, for lack of a better term, because, again, the technology is not there to really define this, right? It can only be determined right now through hair, right, which the half-life for that's eternity. Urine, which the half-life is 28 days. So if you smoked weed or consumed cannabis within the last 28 days, you're going to pop for that, or blood. And none of those accurately determine the amount of marijuana in your system at this time. This is one of those things that we're putting the cart way before the horse. There is no way that we can accurately determine someone's sobriety level with marijuana, and this creates a clear pathway to allow people to consume marijuana and drive. Not to allow, but to enable. I know it's not the intent, but that's what it's going to do. People drink and drive all the time. We've done a lot of laws to support that, and to not to support that, but to oppose that. All this would do right now is remove this and let us figure this out way before we look to even put it in round two. So with that, Madam Speaker, I move the amendment.
Okay. The response?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to address one thing here. We're not putting the cart before the horse because there's no cart. There's literally nothing yet. We're just setting up the framework, and there is going to be a study. So these licenses aren't part of round one. They're part of round two, and they don't even have to be part of round two. We can hold off until after we have the study, so that way the ATCC can look into all the regulations that they would like to put in place, work with the local jurisdictions, get input, and then determine how to proceed moving forward. So with that, I ask the body to reject the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails.
Madam Speaker.
Hold on a second. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Gentleman from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. That is Amendment 593320-1.
Amendment number 1.
Thank you. This is a very simple amendment, and I do thank the committee chair for all the work. I know this is a very long, detailed bill, and a lot of work went into it. We may have disagreements, so I wanted to offer this amendment and something that may make the bill just a little bit better. This is a simple amendment, as I said, that eliminates the provision for the loan loss reserve account. And all this amendment does is say that more state resources will not be used in the promotion of the marijuana industry, and that the lenders in this program, they take risk in their investment, and that's their business decision. That taxpayer resources should not be involved in bailing out drug business deals. We all know that marijuana, it was approved, of course, but the facts are the facts that marijuana has a lot of downsides. If you just look at the National Institute of Drug Abuse, it says marijuana. Again, I know a lot of us have heard these before, but let's reiterate here. Hallucinations, delusions, psychosis, paranoia, schizophrenia, among many others, are the potential downsides of marijuana use. Everyone in this body knows just how finite our resources are, and that we have to be very selective with what we invest our state resources and what we cut, and we need to base our spending and our resources on beneficial priorities like students, like infrastructure, public safety, etc. The decision to invest state resources into promoting the legal drug business that has the potential to harm so many is something that I can't agree with, and I really do not understand why we would want to do that. The state legalizing marijuana is one thing, but investing in it, promoting it, bailing out lenders, it's just another one of those things that this amendment stops, and that we should stay out of the drug business. I push this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chairman of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would ask the body to please reject this amendment. I think my colleague has talked about the capital access program. What we've set up is a program where the Department of Commerce is going to be able to giving a loan loss reserve for banks to get involved with the cannabis industry. So we can get these businesses up and running. Because I want to start, I hate to keep being repetitive, but our goal is to get rid of the illicit drug market. When my colleague was talking about the damage that marijuana does to our community, it's because it's illicit. It's the drug market that does the damage to our community. Whether you like it or not, whether you like marijuana or not, it is not the marijuana that kills people, it's the people trying to get marijuana that end up killing people, robbing people, and getting arrested. We're trying to do away with that, but we cannot do that if these businesses fail. But what he's also talking about is something we call big bank take little bank. Because what he's going to say is, yeah, the little guy gets no help. Let's let all these big out-of-state people come in and dominate our industry. This wasn't built for that. This wasn't created for that. This was created to give a fair shot to Marylanders, to those that are most disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. But you know what's going to be lacking? Access to capital. Because again, it's a new industry, it's a fluctuating industry, and our goal is to get this industry off the ground. Now, if you believe in the studies, it's going to at least be $1 billion a year. Maybe more, maybe two, depending on what you read and what time you read it. But the point is, we want Marylanders to be able to take advantage of that. They shouldn't have to be millionaires before they can get involved, should they? We want people who've actually suffered because of the war on drugs to have an opportunity to now finally benefit and have some kind of generational wealth that they can pass on to their children. And just because they came from poverty doesn't mean that they have to stay there. So it is our responsibility to we put our treasure where we find our heart. At the end of the day, if we believe in this, if we believe in uplifting small businesses, minorities, individuals that have suffered for generations on the war on drugs, then we have to make money available. Otherwise, we're just going to sit back and watch people from out of state, people that have millions of dollars already, come in and make money off my people. That is unacceptable. We know what we value in this state. We value our people, our Marylanders, and we've got to give back to those that have been punished because of the war on drugs. And that's right. That means they're the ones that are going to need the loans. And remember, there is no SBA loans here. You don't get to go to the feds and say, I've got this great marijuana idea. Help me out. You're not going to get it. By my colleague's argument, the only way you're going to be able to get into this business is if you've already got money. And that is not the people we're trying to address. We want everybody to have access, not just those that have money. We want to make sure that Marylanders have a chance to participate in this multi-billion-dollar industry, because once it's gone, it is gone. After round 2 and there's not going to be a big round 3. The people that get in these next few years are getting in on something utterly amazing. And I want them to be a part of my state. I want them to be a part of those communities that suffered. And the only way they can do that is with our help, our assistance, our guidance. That's what this bill does. And the loan loss program ensures they can at least have a start on that. For all those reasons, please oppose this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A couple things. Number one, as I said before, hallucinations, delusions, psychosis, increased heart rate, paranoia, schizophrenia, among many others, have nothing to do with the criminal dynamic of marijuana. It has to do with the fact that marijuana is an illicit drug. Marijuana, what the good delegate basically said is that the state of Maryland wants to become a legalized, or an investor and a promoter of the legalized drug business. He just said to every child, to every young person, to everybody, anybody that may start using marijuana, that it's perfectly fine based on the fact that the state of Maryland wants to invest in this. I believe as a body that marijuana, if it's going to be legal, which the voters approved, should be something that we should pretty much stay out of, try to do our best to do the least amount of promotion possible, because we cannot deny, other than a very small number that may use marijuana, I'm not an expert on it, for medical reasons, that the overall societal benefit is absolutely zero to having more and more people walking around stoned. It's just the facts. I'm not trying to demean anybody. I mean, you just cannot argue. There is no societal benefit to massive uses of marijuana. We've talked about decriminalization. We've done that. I agree and voted for lots of the decriminalization elements over the years. But this idea that promoting marijuana use by investing in it is something that I cannot get behind. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chairman of the committee.
Thank you. I'd like to remind the committee that vape shops took PPP loans. That alcohol, my colleague is basically saying that we don't want to get involved with marijuana. We were elected to do just that. In fact, our citizens told us to do just that. They told us to get involved in it. They told us to regulate and provide something safe for them. I've got to be involved because I want to make sure my constituents have access, but it's also safe. That means the state has to get involved. And best believe, I'm sure even he's going to want us to get our tax money. So we are already involved. Let's be clear. Now, are we involved in a failing industry that's ran by out-of-state individuals? That's our decision. Are we involved in an industry that doesn't represent our state? That's our decision. But the citizens have already told us we're going to be involved. So many of his arguments could have been made last year. And as people know, I'm not a big supporter of marijuana, so I'm not going to sit here and bash his thought process. But I will say that ship has sailed, that train has left the station. So it's not about what we should do and how we should be involved. We are involved. We are the captains of the ship, and we were guided safely. In doing so, we want to make sure that Marylanders have access. So I do appreciate his value argument, but I'm here on the business level side talking about we want to make sure that this is successful. We have already been told we're going to be involved, so let's do this the right way where Marylanders have the best access.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the debate, and I move the amendment. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I just wanted to ask the floor
I didn't call on you.
a couple questions.
I didn't call on you because we had one over here, too. Gentleman from Baltimore County. And I'll get to you.
Madam Speaker, I have a few questions for the floor leader about this loan. Is this going to be done by a bank and then the state's going to guarantee that the money will be paid back? Is that correct the way I'm reading that?
It's a beautiful way of reading that. Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. How is a federally regulated bank going to loan money
Great question. They're not.
So then how do they get the money? That's what I was just asking.
State-regulated banks. Good thing about being on Economic Matters is we regulate the banking industry, including the local state banks. And those are the ones that are agreeing to participate.
I didn't know we still had state banks
yes.
after the last downfall.
So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Gentlelady from Hartford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the floor leader just ask a couple quick questions? We have a AAA bond rating, and Maryland's very proud of that, correct?
Sure.
Okay. So have we checked with the Treasurer's Office to make sure that if we have this relationship where the taxpayer is ultimately guaranteeing if these businesses don't take off and they fail, the taxpayer is going to be on the hook. So my concern is what's going to happen to our AAA bond rating.
Well, I don't really know that dude like that, but I mean, we have checked with our treasurer. Yes, I'm joking, by the way.
Okay. But we don't know what the bond rating, how they would take that, right? The bond rating
There's
industry
been no
up in New
alarms
York?
raised for the bond rating. I want to make sure that we understand this is a loan, $500,000 up to $1 million. $500 for dispensaries, up to $1 million loan that has to be paid off over 10 years by the loan applicant. And we are backing this up in the case that they don't pay it back and the business fails. So it's not an overall large amount of money when you consider the number of licenses.
But is it each person that opens a business, it's 500,000?
Correct.
Well,
apply for it, and they have to remember the still other regulations. They still have to qualify for a loan. This just gives them, since they can't get an SBA loan, another opportunity to start, and let's admit it, a business, because that's all this is. Is at this point, by our Marylanders' vote, a business.
Well, it just seems to me we don't have the nuts and bolts for the loan and the financial aspect as much as we have, like the issue of the zoning and preemption and everything. I guess I'm just concerned that, as my colleague sitting next to me said, we're not, basically, shouldn't we be more concerned about public safety than investment right now and creating businesses? Because we don't have a mechanism. And what if a little kid gets run over by somebody that is under the influence of marijuana? I mean, and the kid's dead, and that's going to affect those parents. That's my concern. Is I'm just thinking, this is a major bill with a lot of moving parts, and we really don't have everything together. And I'm concerned about the AAA bond rating.
I'll be very clear. We have almost everything together. I put my blood, sweat, and tears in developing this bill. We have attended to this banking situation very seriously. The banks have every opportunity to deny any and every loan that they do not see fit to take. Just because they're being backed by our government, that doesn't mean they're going to be given out. The person still has to qualify. We have thought as much as we can to cover this.
But the banks are federally regulated too?
They absolutely are not. They are state-regulated banks and credit
State-regulated
unions.
banks.
Correct.
Okay. But now, are people putting money in those state-regulated banks that already have marijuana industries? Because I've heard that they're, in other words, no banks will take any of that
We're
money
already
because
doing
it's
it. We have
illegal
two banks
at
that
the
have been
federal
doing
level.
it for the medical marijuana. That's why they're good. And we're setting up a system outside of this. The commission is going to be working because we're promulgating rules to make sure every business is banking. To make sure we have enough access from the banking industry, every business has to bank, because at the end of the day, we want to take the cash out of this. We want to legitimize the business. So we have thought of all of these things. We have addressed that. The banks still have the ultimate say in the loans, and we will make sure there is a working relationship between each of these businesses and said bank.
Okay, but this is a future, right? So there's no guarantees.
There's never any guarantees.
Right. Okay, thank you, sir.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Everyone recorded their vote. Clerk will call the roll. The amendment fails. Gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 123728/1.
Amendment number 1.
Thank you. So this is a simple amendment that is an attempt to eliminate conflicts between neighbors. So I'm sure many of you have been on a road trip
hit a skunk, and that smell stays with you. It's forever. So this amendment's simple. What it does is adds back into the bill language that allows homeowners associations and landlords to create rules regarding marijuana use in that particular property. You can imagine some homeowners associations, the properties are larger and it won't be an issue. But many of them, landlords and homeowner associations alike, you're stacked on top of each other. People's balcony is on top of another balcony. Within some of the older buildings, the smell can permeate from one apartment to another. And as I said, think about that road trip. That smell doesn't go away. Now, somebody tells me the more the skunk smell, the better the stuff is. I'm not a professional on it, but somebody has shared that information with me. So I know this body's passionate about homeowners association condo boards. I remember a year or two ago we passed pretty extensive regulation on reserve studies. And hopefully we did that because we care so much about those boards. So this amendment is it would go a long way in allowing control at the smallest level. We're not asking for control that's going to get somebody in a jam legally. This is just an effort to help. We all know how tough it is to live together in those small confines. And this is just an effort to help make that a more peaceful process and eliminate those potential conflicts. So with that, Madam Speaker, I ask you to move the amendment.
Vice Chair of the Committee. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to ask the body to reject the amendment, and frankly, I am sympathetic to the argument that you're making, and I think that there are many voters, along with many other members of this this body, that would agree with you that we don't want to smell smoke in our home. We don't want to smell smoke, if I live in a condominium from a neighbor, and that to come through. But I just want to remind you that this bill, and it has been stated over and over and over again, is a licensure bill. That is what it does. Similar to the DWI argument or the whatever else, the manufacturing or whatever that was, that previous amendment. We are not getting into those other areas. This would be for another committee to take up. I just want to say that the bill is silent and it does not restrict private contracts or leases, which is a private contract between an HOA or a landlord and a tenant. And so with that, the amendment is not needed, and I ask the body to reject it.
Gentleman from Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So with what you're saying, it's not an issue. If we can just simply eliminate any possible concern that there could be some restrictive language. The language is already in the bill. This just simply puts it back in. The language is there. If it's not necessary, it's so easy just to appease the concerns that you shared, many people here share. So for that reason, I ask you to move the amendment. Thank you.
Vice Chair of the Committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I understand your concern, but the bill is silent on it because we took it out to make it an Economic Matters Committee bill. So if there is a bill in the future that wants to address this, it would go to a different committee. But this bill solely deals with licensure. It also, I want to say this again, an HOA or a landlord-tenant lease, I mean, they can still restrict or ban the smoking of marijuana within their community or on their property if they so choose. It is silent on that. So your concern, really, frankly, it's not precluded in this bill, and you can still do that.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read next bill.
Special Order Counter number 16, House Bill 705, Declaration of Rights, Right to Reproductive Freedom. Favor report adopted.
Maker of the special order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I do have an amendment at the desk. It's 283723/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
This amendment alters the language of Article 48, Declaration of Rights, to read as follows: that every person, including the preborn, as a central component of the individual's right to liberty and equality, has the fundamental right to life and reproductive liberty. The state may not directly or indirectly deny, burden, or abridge the right unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. I offer this amendment because science tells us that a female human being at the time of her a female human being is female at the time of her fertilization. The baby girl has 46 chromosomes, 23 from each parent. The mother contributes the X chromosome, the father contributes either the X or the Y chromosome. Consequently, the baby girl will have the XX chromosome at fertilization, and the baby boy will have the XY chromosome at fertilization. Subsequently, in week 3, the baby's blood vessels and sex cells form. Foundations of the brain, spinal cord, and nervous system are laid. Week 5, arms and legs and facial features appear. The blood is separate from the mother's. Week 6, toes and fingers develop, and both the reproductive organs as well as the heartbeat become first detectable. Let me repeat. Week 6, the reproductive organs are first detectable. Week 12, a girl's uterus and ovaries are evident. And by week 22, ovaries are completely formed and contain an estimated 6 million eggs. Week 22. HB 705, as written, chooses winners and losers. The bill chooses the reproductive rights of the mother over the reproductive rights of the preborn child. House Bill 705, as written, allows for the destruction of the life of the preborn child and forever takes away the preborn child's own right to reproduction. Week 22, that preborn child is equipped with a fully developed reproductive system, complete with an estimated 6 million eggs. It is for these reasons that I move the amendment.
Recognizing the committee chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning. And thank you for giving me the amendment ahead of time. I appreciate it. I would ask this body respectfully to reject this amendment. We have rejected the construct of personhood in Maryland many times in our committee. We have seen that bill. This bill is about the right of the woman to make the fundamental decision about her own pregnancy. Ultimately, this bill is about giving Marylanders a decision about whether the fundamental right of reproductive freedom should be enshrined in our state constitution. It is the highest level of protection that we can give people in Maryland, especially given the decision this past summer of Dobbs. The U.S. Supreme Court decided that abortion was not protected under our Constitution. So I respectfully ask that you reject this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
Science and religion agree in regards to the formation of life. I provided you with the scientific facts in regards to the gestational cycle. If we turn to the Bible, we find, "For God spoke to the prophet Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." God has a plan for each of our lives, and God has a plan for the preborn child's life as well. This amendment offers hope to both the mother and the baby. The challenge before us is not to perpetuate a culture of death. The challenge is to work together in a bipartisan manner to investigate the reasons why a mother chooses to end the life of her preborn child and work together to fix it. I press the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Recognizing the
Thank you, Madam
Yes,
Speaker.
go ahead.
I have a second amendment at the desk. It's 373529/1.
amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
This amendment also alters the language of Article 48, Declaration of Rights, to read as follows: that every person, as a central component of the individual's right to liberty and equality, has the fundamental right to abortion. The state may not directly or indirectly deny, burden, or abridge the right unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. I offer this amendment because the term reproductive freedom is not a defined term. It's not defined in Maryland Code, nor is it defined in the dictionary. If you Google it, Vermont talks about reproductive liberty. That was the term used in last year's House bill regarding this matter. California actually does talk about reproductive freedom. The term used in Maryland's House Bill 705 and the term used in California's ballot initiative. Specifically in Article 1, Section 1.1 of the California Constitution reads, "The state shall not deny, interfere with an individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, which includes their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion and their fundamental right to choose or refuse contraceptives." So boldly going where no man has gone before, California actually mentions the word abortion in their constitutional amendment. So with this amendment, I ask the legislature to be honest with the voters so they know exactly what they're voting for and substitute a term that is actually defined. Abortion, defined in the Oxford English Dictionary. Abortion, defined in the National Legal Encyclopedia, CJS. Abortion, defined in Black's Law Dictionary. And abortion, a term actually used in California's constitutional amendment. It is for these reasons that I move the amendment.
Recognizing the chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you again for the courtesy. I will ask this body to reject this amendment. This is a very narrow view of what reproductive freedom means, the way this amendment is drafted. Reproductive freedom means being able to make decisions about whether to become pregnant, continue a pregnancy, and whether to end a pregnancy. But it also includes the following: whether to use a condom, have a vasectomy, use IVF, use contraception, abortion, whether to have children or not. For the definition, look at it, any dictionary. What is the definition of reproductive? I looked it up this morning. And it basically, in many dictionaries, it states relating to or involved in the production of babies, young animals, or new plants, reproducing. When you look up what does freedom mean, it states the following: free from coercion. It says the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or constraint. And then what happens when it's not defined in a bill? Unless defined elsewhere, the courts will apply the plain meaning rule. What's the plain meaning rule? The plain meaning rule is an approach to legal proceedings that relies on the usual and ordinary meaning of the text. It is not a text. It is not a form of art. So I ask this body to reject this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
I think the response actually proves my point. There are examples, many examples given, none necessarily which legally define the terms put together, reproductive freedom. However, we do have a term that is already defined. For example, if you look back just a few years ago, Maryland had a constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2020. It was titled Balancing the State Budget. Whenever I spoke with voters, they supported a balanced budget amendment. I agreed. We could certainly use that at the federal level. But when you explain to them that Maryland already had a requirement for a balanced budget and that that amendment just gave the legislature more authority to add, subtract, and move money around, they were perplexed. Why then would it be titled Balancing the State Budget? I couldn't explain. Just last week, there was floor debate regarding House Bill 131, and the floor leader on the bill made the point that the term unnatural or perverted sex practice was unconstitutionally vague and therefore should be removed from Maryland Code. This body overwhelmingly supported passage of that bill, given that explanation. The same applies here. The term reproductive freedom could also be said to be unconstitutionally vague because it's not defined. It's not defined currently, and we don't have to wait on some court to define it in the future. But yet we're going to enshrine a term that's not defined in our state constitution. I ask this body to be absolutely clear to the voters as to exactly what they're voting on: an amendment to the state constitution for abortion, a defined term. I press the amendment.
Again, Madam
Committee
Speaker,
Chair.
thank you, and thank you. It is too narrow. Again, I rely on the arguments that I stated before. It is too narrow. Please reject this amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
Roll call.
Clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title?
Madam Speaker.
Okay. Yes. Frederick, gentlelady from Frederick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. It is amendment number 913523-1.
amendment number 1.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you. This is a simple amendment to replace the word person with woman. As we have just heard from the good delegate on an amendment, words have meaning, and this is too vague. And as we respectfully heard from the chair of committee, that she just clarified that this bill is about the right of a woman. I want you to picture a woman with an unplanned pregnancy. She decides that she would like to keep her baby. Her partner is not happy about the pregnancy. He does not want her to have the baby, nor does he wish to be financially responsible for the child, and he is just not ready to be a father. He feels that his reproductive rights are being violated under this constitutional amendment. Could this now be left up to the courts to decide? Are we putting men's reproductive rights equal to a woman's? Would a woman have to have the father of the baby sign a form that he consents to her having an abortion? And what if he doesn't? With taking out the word woman, as has previously been used in Maryland law and in the courts, and recognizing that women bear most of the burden of reproduction, what are the unintended and the intended consequences? We have already seen embryo custody battles with assisted artificial reproduction. So, on this International Women's Day 2023, please do not be the one that votes no on this amendment, effectively canceling women from being the sole decider in these life-changing situations. Please vote green to defend women's reproductive rights. Madam Speaker, I move the amendment.
Recognizing the committee chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank you for giving me the courtesy. I really appreciate it. It makes it easier. And I will ask the body to reject this amendment. And on this International Women's Day, this is a big bill for women. I want to clarify that the bill does not change Maryland's current law, which provides that the decision about abortion rests with the woman in consultation with her provider, with the woman. This bill is about a woman's right to choose what we do with our body, when, where. Again, reproductive freedom is not just about women. The bill is also about contraceptive decisions of men, including condoms and vasectomies. Ultimately, this bill is about retaining an individual's fundamental right to reproductive freedom. This bill, when enacted, will go to the voters in Maryland, the voters, our constituents, the people, to decide whether to enshrine it in the Constitution because it gives us the highest level of protection. I ask this body to not support this amendment and reject it.
Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady from Anne Arundel.
Hartford.
Excuse me.
That's okay.
I'm sorry, Hartford.
I do get around. There we go. There we go.
TMI.
All right. All right. Welcome. That's a good. Now we're all listening. All right. Body, I hear the good delegate from multiple counties as well, right? Yeah. On her rejection of this amendment. But body, who in here can tell me of a single case where a man has been denied a vasectomy or condoms? Please, let's be reasonable. We are asking for women to be the major group of people we are talking about, because that is literally who we are talking about here. We are not talking about men. Men are not being denied vasectomies. They are not being told when they go to the store that they cannot buy condoms. We are talking about women. So please, when we're talking about this issue, consider those of us who are women, who have been born women, who are suffering because sometimes women don't get the things we think we deserve. Even Republican women, I know that would shock you. We are separate, we are different, and it is okay, but we like to be acknowledged. So I will stand in support of this amendment, Madam Speaker.
Any further debate? Okay. Clerk, call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Gentlelady from Hartford.
Madam Speaker, for some reason, my button didn't work on one of the amendments, and I can read it. It was Delegate, can I use this?
Permission to use a member's name.
Delegate Weibel's. It was.
Permission granted.
Yes, it's, wait a minute, 373529/1. I wish to be in the green, I'm sorry. My button didn't work, and I thought it did, and I investigated it, and I was not voting. So I don't know why, I thought I hit it, so. Thank you, Madam Chair, or thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 10. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 119, Primary and Secondary Education Comprehensive Health Education Framework established. Favorable report is amended and adopted.
Recognizing the gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I have an amendment at the desk. It's 253625/1.
Amendment number 1.
So much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Madam Speaker, I stand today to discuss the penalty provision of this bill. There is a penalty that, if I understand it correctly, is incrementally imposed on boards of education if they do not comply with the state superintendent's demands relating to policy and guidelines established by that state board, and that it is possible under this piece of legislation that a county's board of education could lose 20% of their funding and held until they come into compliance with a state superintendent's demands. And aside from the general concerns I have, which I'll use in my closing, I'm going to just reiterate and share with the legislative body the positions of MABE, which is our Maryland Association of Boards of Education, which are firmly grounded in the association's adopted legislative positions that support local decision-making authority in developing curriculum, assessments, grading policies, and instructional programs, and the adoption of statewide laws and regulations reflecting a commitment to local governance, professional judgment of local educators, and community engagement. They also oppose any efforts by the General Assembly to legislate curriculum or testing matters inconsistent with MABE's adopted resolution and legislative priorities. The State Superintendents Association has similar concerns with local school boards and other advocacy organizations regarding legislative efforts to codify standardized curriculum, assessments, or standards. I'll editorialize and say, why do I think this boards of education and superintendents feel that way? Because education is a personal and a local decision. It is moms and dads, it is custodians of children who participate in education. It is engagement with the teachers who have control of the classroom, who should have control of the classroom, through curriculum created by the local boards of education, I'll grant with guidance from the state. And so when we say to a local county board of education who has been, in most cases, elected by the citizens of that county to represent them, when we say to that same local board of education that local parents who show up at the meetings with concerns and frustrations are not able to realize that discussion, have debate, and a forum to have grievance with curriculum, you are eliminating an essential component of public education and how we do things in our state. So a 10% plus another 10% penalty does a lot of things. It controls from the state level the local curriculum, and it controls dissent from those citizens who have these concerns. I will tell you, as an elected representative, what we've watched throughout the country during COVID and related issues is that local boards of education that defy the will of the local citizens, the voters, do it at a cost. I worry that this bill, with that penalty, creates a same framework and challenge where local citizens will lose their ability to have their voice and their say in how their children are educated. My last and closing concern that I have is when our state says that our policy is going to be, we're going to hold money from the boards of education, when we're going to hold money that's used to educate our children. There are hundreds of thousands of students in school today, tens of thousands of teachers who are teaching those kids today that have no idea what we're doing here. But the minute they find out that money is being withheld from their classrooms, when money is being withheld from the students that need that money to be educated, when those monies are being withheld, when parents and voters realize that those monies, which are significant sources of tax dollars, large percentages of county budgets, are being withheld because of this, they will ask some generic questions, and I think they'll conclude that the state of Maryland has got this wrong. My amendment resolves this in my mind, and if we're going to have discussions, if we're going to have debate, if we're going to have a forum or a disagreement, let's have it in the place where it belongs, which is in the legislature, not through a demand from a state superintendent who's not happy with an outcome.
Can you explain what your amendments do? You said a whole lot, but can you explain what your amendments do?
I eliminate the penalty provisions under this law and simply say if the state is going to be involved with curriculum writing, that they do it in consultation with local boards of education and accept the premise that the local boards of education have the ability and the right to develop their own curriculum, granted with guidance from the state, not through the compulsion of penalties. That's the reason for the amendment, Madam Speaker. I'd ask to move the amendment.
Okay. Recognizing the chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the maker of the amendment for providing it to me, but I will ask the body to resist and reject this amendment. Our committee has had significant debate, and it was pointed out earlier during the cannabis reform debate. That's what we do. And to be clear, I want to be clear for people who are actually not on the committee, what we are discussing is curriculum that has already been vetted by everyone's jurisdiction in this body. Okay? The framework that gets put out by the Maryland State Department of Education is developed with the input of task force, including MSDE, the Maryland Department of Health, local education supervisors, teachers, students, national subject matter experts, Talbot County, Somerset County, Montgomery County, Calvert County, St. Anne's, Anne Arundel. I could read them all. Worcester. Every single local jurisdiction is represented before MSDE puts out the curriculum, and they agree to abide by the framework. The framework lets the local jurisdictions establish the curriculum. So what the gentleman said is actually factually incorrect. What we are doing now is putting forth a framework and says, local jurisdictions, you've already agreed to abide by the framework, and so what the legislation does is say, if you agree to abide by it, then that's fine. You won't ever have a penalty. But if you don't abide by it, which certain counties are doing right now, just one in particular, Carroll County, quite frankly, then the state superintendent can say, here's notice. Right now, there actually isn't any notice, so I think the gentleman actually would prefer this. You can be given notice, you have 30 days to cure, and if you don't cure, then there's a penalty. And then if you don't cure within 60 days, there's another penalty. And once you've done what you're supposed to do, then you get all the money restored to the jurisdictions. So again, I would ask this body to reject the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to the floor leader and the committee chair, thank you for the response to that, because much of that I tend to agree with. But the trend and the precedent that we're setting by putting forward a penalty provision where we're taking money away is dangerous. It is dangerous. And further than that, instead of they're talking about guidelines and guardrails, whatever the phrase of the day is on the legislative floor here, we have one overriding obligation, and that is to the voters and to the parents and the guardians of children who are being educated. And when we say that a local board of education comes to a conclusion that there are difficulties, the grievance should happen in a two-party way, with conflict resolution in mind, where win-wins are created. It's not through the lens of saying, if you don't do it our way, we are going to take money away from the local boards of education. That is not conflict resolution. That is inviting the very worst of governance, and it will result in citizens being outraged when they realize their board of educations cannot any longer do what it is that they were elected to do, which is represent the interests of children on a local level, directly accountable to those citizens and voters. And let me just say one other thing, because I am reading the amendment to the bill that talks about the penalty provisions, and there is very little here that I would agree with. And I don't doubt that I'm gutting this bill. It's my intention by putting the amendment, because there is literally no need for us to talk about notice and compliance. There is surely talk about using guidelines created at a state level that help a local board of education develop their own curriculum with their own input from citizens. This is basically saying that the state superintendent of schools, and I've got to come up with a word that doesn't actually connotate the wrong intention, but it gives that state superintendent unilateral control and determination as to what happens at a local level. That is one individual. Madam Speaker, right now we have a Democrat governor, a Democrat administration, a state superintendent that's running with the support from that appointment. What happens if there's a Republican governor in 4 or 8 years, and when they set in place a new state superintendent of schools who sets their own standard? Are we going to say that we're okay with that same state superintendent of the Board of Education coming down with more conservative values, more conservative ideas, and if that doesn't happen, that we're going to hit some of these counties and with the same penalty provision? I think not. This bill is ill-conceived, and it's really ill-conceived not through the lens of there needs to be the obligation to put curriculum in place with guidance from the State Board of Education. It's that we're putting in place a penalty, and it's not an insignificant penalty. I didn't do the homework on what it would cost some of our counties if the state actually pulls and does this. It has to be significant, and I would ask, Madam Speaker, that we accept the amendment and accept the role of local boards of education to work with the state to do the work, and not let this be the precedent that we set every time the local boards of education on future issues like this all of a sudden realize they have no say, and that we continue to drive policies from a state level. That can't be good policy.
Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I mean, you said a lot, and I'm going to try to be brief, because the fact of the matter is you're simply just, unfortunately, wrong. First of all, we have a state superintendent who was appointed by the state board. The state board was appointed by our former Republican governor. Okay, so that's number one. Second of all, I already mentioned that the framework, it's a framework that is left up to the local jurisdictions to hash out and actually create a curriculum. So the fact of the matter is the local jurisdictions are creating the curriculum. The last thing that I'll say, and then I'll sit down after I ask you to reject this amendment, is that the gentleman said and discussed his overriding obligation. Well, my overall obligation is to all the children here in the state of Maryland. Every single child, regardless of their diversity, regardless of their gender identity, and regardless of their sexuality. And what I will not tolerate is for certain jurisdictions to simply say, we are not going to discuss you, we are not going to acknowledge you, and we are not going to talk about you in our curriculum. So that is my overall obligation, and that is what this bill gets at. For those bad actors that refuse to acknowledge all of our state's children. And with that, I would ask this body to reject the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the amendment.
Okay. Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails.
That's right.
Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title?
There is. I'll be brief. Amendment number 823-227/1.
Amendment number 1.
So much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
So, Madam Speaker, thank you, and thank you for the committee chair for that dialogue on the last amendment. And the Second Amendment speaks to a parent's right to decide for themselves how their child's going to be educated. We believe in this amendment that we should provide reasonable period of time for a parent or guardian to opt in to a parent or guardian students participating in the health curriculum. I don't need to be long-winded because we could adopt my prior points on the First Amendment to simply say this, that education is a personal exercise between a parent, guardian's child, and the teacher in the classroom. If there is objection from those parents and children, frankly, of what they're being taught in this setting under this bill related to health, that the parents should have the ability to have that decision making. It's not unreasonable to make that request, and I would ask the body to move the amendment.
Recognizing the chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'll ask the body to reject this amendment. This is already happening. Under the framework, the local education agencies have to adopt policies and guidelines to, one, allow families to preview the curriculum, and two, allow them an opportunity to opt out. And the local jurisdictions can do that in any manner that they see fit. For instance, in Frederick, I know that they send home a permission slip, and they send home a quote preview of what's going to be taught. And if the parents want to opt out, they can simply sign that, and an alternative appropriate curriculum will be made available for that child. So because of that, and because this is already being done, I would urge the body to resist this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Committee Chair, for a reasonable debate over an important issue. We appreciate that from our side of the street. Let me close by saying that, counter to what I just heard, and I'll read from the bill as amended, if the state superintendent determines that a county board is not following every element of the policy and guidelines established by the state board, or is authorizing a student to opt out of a course of instruction in a manner that is not approved by the state board, the state superintendent shall notify the county board. Ultimately, it could fall to the penalty provision. The only point I'm making is that we definitely need to make sure that we are allowing locals to decide what that opt-out looks like. Why would we not? That's the job of the local boards of education. That is not unreasonable, and I would imagine that the State Board of Education would feel the same. Thank you, Committee Chair, for correcting me on how state superintendent is appointed, and I would ask the body to move the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? No. Roll call.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments? The gentleman from Calvert.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill, primary and secondary education, comprehensive health education framework, says that if the state superintendent determines that you're not teaching everything that they're telling you to teach, then he can take away 10% of your state funding. Teach what we tell you, or we take away your money. But what if the kids aren't learning? Way too many schools in this state have children that aren't learning. Way too many schools are failed schools. Recently, there was a story, I believe it was 23 schools in Baltimore, where not a single student tested proficient in math. It's extraordinary. How is that possible? Why would we keep doing the same thing? And every year we
Does
come
the gentleman
back to,
have an amendment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's get to it. Let's get to it.
It's amendment number 119-8133-261.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment, Madam Speaker.
So ordered.
23 schools, failed schools. And there are other schools across the state that also have similar issues, where not a single student tested proficient in math. And it just never seems to get better. So I ask you a question. Do you have liberty? Do you really have liberty and freedom if you can't take your kid out of one of those failed schools and go somewhere else? You do not have liberty. You are not free. And so this amendment simply states that if a public school does not have at least 51% of its students scoring proficient in math, the state superintendent shall require the comptroller to withhold 100% of the state funding. And that state funding shall be distributed by the comptroller to the parents so they can choose a school that actually works. And they can choose a charter school, an independent school, a parochial school, a private school, a public school. or military school. Someone recently said in a book, my mother said I was failing and my grades were slipping. And I started getting in trouble with the law. So she sent me to Valley Forge Military Academy, the governor of Maryland. There are many, many people who have children who could benefit from a similar experience. There are so many people that could benefit from going to a school that works, a school that fits their needs, rather than the one-size-fits-all statism that comes from this body. How many years will we go in the Maryland General Assembly before we let people be free and finally choose an education that works, instead of condemning generation after generation in so many parts of this state, and most definitely in Baltimore, my hometown, place where I was born, to more squalor, more decay, no opportunity. What can a student possibly do, and what can an adult do out of those schools in the job workforce if they can't test proficient in math? And so, Madam Speaker, this simple amendment empowers the citizens of the state who have children stuck in failed schools once and for all, and it sets them free. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be brief. I mean, I think people see what this amendment is. I've received so many texts during that speech. It is so interesting. One, I didn't know how long it was going to take you to mention Baltimore City, but it wasn't long. And two, a couple sessions ago, it was don't defund the police, but this session it's defund the public schools. That's essentially what this bill will do. I ask you to reject this amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Lady from Hartford.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. The amendment number is 253820/1.
Amendment number 1.
So much to be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Body, this is, I hope, a very friendly amendment because I'm a very friendly gal. You may have heard it before, and it's still just as good as it was the day it was born. This amendment essentially says that for students that are in pre-kindergarten through grade 3, that the county board may not establish a curriculum or guide that instructs students or school personnel or any third party to teach on the subject of sexual orientation or gender identity that is not in a manner that is age appropriate or in a manner that the department determines is age inappropriate. This isn't banning you from talking about it. This isn't banning you from covering the subjects. It's just saying, please, if you're going to be teaching children, it needs to be done in a manner that is age appropriate for the group of children that are pre-K through 3. This is very, very important because some of the books that I know many of us have seen that are floating around in our libraries and ending up in our curriculums are frankly disturbing. They are nothing short of pornographic material, and they should be not inside of our schools. If you want to teach your children things that are wildly inappropriate to many of us, you can go ahead and do that at home. This amendment makes sure that if you are teaching our children who are young these issues, you are doing it in a way that their little, beautiful minds can comprehend and not in a way that is traumatizing or deleterious to their emotional development. And with that, I would move that amendment, Madam Speaker.
Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I would ask the body to resist this amendment. This is already being done in the health education framework that was put out by the task force, which included everyone's jurisdiction in this body. It specifically says concepts and skills related to family life and human sexuality must be age appropriate and taught by teachers who have had additional preparation and content and teaching methods of the material. So it's already being done. I would ask this body to reject this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I would just say that what the good delegate from Howard read from is not our state law. That is just a policy. And this beautiful amendment allows us to put it right in there so that everyone knows how to follow the rules and we can make sure that everyone's doing their due diligence on this issue. And it's really, really an important amendment. And I think, especially for my purple friends, may fare very well in your districts.
Gentleman from Southern Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the floor leader rise for a couple of questions on this?
Committee Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just real quick on that last amendment you mentioned about defunding the police and then defunding the schools.
We're on this amendment.
Well, I'm just saying that your bill's the only thing that looks
I
at
will
defunding the
discuss
schools.
the current amendment before us. and
Okay,
that is
great.
all.
I'm looking at the bill testimony, and it seems to have a lot to do with this amendment. There looks to be a lot of opposition, as many as like 60, centered around gender identity. And then after the bill hearing, the entire bill was struck. Why was the entire bill rewritten?
The bill was struck because for the reasons you just brought, so thank you for bringing that to my attention so I can share that with everybody here. I heard the concerns of the voices of the parents that came in, and so I simply said, we're going to remove the bill and have everyone follow what's currently in the regulations now by our Maryland State Department of Education. So that's why the bill was changed. And also the testimony that you're reading is from prior to the bill being amended.
Yes. So thank you. It sounds like we're in agreement that the advocates spoke up against what was number 5 in your original bill, gender identity, and then family something or other here in the bill. And then you corrected the bill. I just wanted to thank you for that. There is also a Senate bill that hasn't been conformed to this bill I was looking at. And my question is for you, if the advocates spoke out for this and they obviously didn't want it, it was a problem, we went and rewrote the bill, why wouldn't you just accept the amendment?
So there were advocates that supported the bill as well, so you didn't mention them. MCASA, the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, Annapolis Pride, LifeBridge Center for Hope, Planned Parenthood, the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore City, MedChi, GLSEN. So there was I could go on and on. The Maryland Psychological Association. I could go on and on. The University of Maryland Safe Center. I could go on and on. I keep going on and on. There was so much testimony. So I didn't accept the amendment because there were a lot of people that came in support of the legislation as it was actually initially introduced.
So what my fear is, and I think a lot of the people that objected and the reason why the bill was rewrote is that this is not going to be done at the legislature because there was so much pushback. You know, we're putting it in writing. And now what you're telling me is because people supported the bill that they're probably going to do the same thing through regulations, through the curriculum changes at the state board. That's what I'm hearing.
So I'm not sure what your question is. I requested that the bill be amended and rewritten, so I will tell you why it was, and only I know why it was. And it was actually to enforce what we're already supposed to be doing, what the local jurisdictions are already supposed to be doing. So that's why it was.
But what is the problem with not accepting the amendment? The amendment is simply not to talk about gender identity between a kindergarten and 3rd grade. So we're in somewhat of an agreement. That's the reason why the bill was rewritten.
No, I don't think we're in agreement at all. And the amendment actually would get into curriculum writing, which is what the previous gentleman who had an amendment did not want to do. He did not want us at the state level to get into curriculum writing. And so we're going to leave that up to the local jurisdictions.
So let me ask another question then, since we're kind of beating around the bush here. If a child came up to a teacher and said, had questions about this, would the teacher be required to answer the child? Or would the teacher say, you know what, you're better off going home and asking your parents?
This bill deals with what is taught in health classes, in the health curriculum, or actually any curriculum. If they're not following the math education curriculum. In your scenario, I don't know who the child is going up to. Are they going up to the teacher at recess? Are they going up to the principal? I don't know who you're talking about in the school system, so I can't answer that question.
Well, when we originally started...
I will tell you that in kindergarten, the framework that the local jurisdictions have to come up to is kindergartners are to recognize a range of ways people identify and express their gender, recognize it's important to treat people of gender identities and expressions with respect. That's the framework. The locals come up with that curriculum. In grade 1, it's essentially the same thing. It doesn't drastically change until you get to middle school. So all this talk about we're showing our kindergartners obscene material, we're talking to kindergartners about obscene, that's just trying to gaslight a situation. So let's not do that. Let's talk facts and let's talk about what's actually in the framework. That's what I'm happy to talk about. And I'm happy to continue to have a back and forth with you, but we've been here long and I know Madam Speaker doesn't want it, so I'm going to sit down. I would urge everyone to reject this amendment, but you're happy to continue. Thank you.
I just kind of feel like you dodged a question there, because we're talking about the amendment, and that's what we're frankly on. We started this debate by bringing up another amendment, and you straightened it out. Well, you want to be on this amendment. And this amendment right now is to stop teachers, school officials from talking about gender identity from kids from kindergarten to 3rd grade. Madam Speaker, I've never figured out, there's this theory out here that teachers care so much about children, and they do, and we're really thankful for that. But they don't care about the children more than the parents care about the children. And there's some topics that I feel, and I think the majority of Marylanders feel, that should be addressed by the parents. And this is one of them. The amendment was offered in good faith. It seems like we had some like-mindedness, because we did rewrite an entire bill after the bill hearing. The amendment speaks toward that, and I thank the young lady for offering the amendment. I encourage everybody to vote for it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Young lady from Montgomery.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to address the maker of the amendment.
Yes, ma'am.
Earlier today, we were walking to the State House. You were asking me about my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So when my daughter is in school and telling people in kindergarten through 3rd grade about her 2 mommies and someone else overhears that, based on your amendment, is the teacher allowed to explain to everyone that some people have 2 mommies and some people have 2 daddies?
Yeah, I believe that would be age appropriate.
You think that would be age appropriate? So what in particular within the curriculum do you find age inappropriate?
So it really depends on which district you're talking about and what they're actually teaching in the classroom. And in fact, it actually depends on which teachers specifically. So I have a friend, for example, whose child is in the Montgomery County school system, and she was struggling with some gender issues. In fact, there's been a 500% increase, as you may know, in gender identity concerns in your school children in your specific district, which I think stands out from many of our jurisdictions. When she came home, her mother decided to remove her from the school system, and within a few months of no other particular thing, the child no longer felt she had those issues. So I would ask, what is being taught to that child that she believes there's a problem with her gender when she's in the school system, but the second she's removed from it, she no longer has those concerns?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, as with the chair, who's done an excellent job on this and was glad to have me get up and add some things, I worry that amendments like these are taking making a decision political when it should be about what's age appropriate. Our State Board of Education already has specific rules. We don't tell people about sex, we don't tell all these things, but we make it okay for kids in kindergarten through 3rd grade to know that I'm okay and that other of my colleagues are okay, and that people who are having gender identity, who have issues with gender identity are okay as well. It is all age appropriate. This is just another chance to erase a portion of the population, and I urge the body to reject the amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Body, this is a very reasonable amendment. I think that if you polled this amendment in all of your districts, you would find that most parents, no matter what party they're registered in, believe that this amendment is reasonable. We are not telling you that you need to discriminate against anybody's lifestyle choices or their family makeup. Every family is special and different, and that's okay. And that's not what this amendment is about. This amendment is about a very disturbing trend that we're seeing, especially in certain specific schools in our communities where children are becoming essentially brainwashed and confused for reasons that are not necessary. You do not need to have a kindergartner every time they come into a classroom asked, what are your pronouns for the day? That is not necessary. And that is all that we are asking, is that the people of our state are represented well by us, because I believe that they support this amendment, and they would, and if we polled them, I'm sure that you would see that was true.
Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would urge this body not to get distracted. This bill is not about what was just discussed by the young lady from Harford County. This bill is, all it says is that, look, you need to follow the framework that has already been set out, and if you don't, there will be, as they say, consequences and repercussions. That's what this bill does. And specifically to the amendment, it's already being done. Apparently it was a good idea because it's already in the framework that the curriculum has to be age appropriate. So I would ask everyone to reject this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Curriculums change. They're going to change. They're going to change every year. So this just makes sure that our people are protected, that our children are protected. Madam Speaker, I would move my amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? No. Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will call the roll. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. That finally ends the work at the desk. Committee announcements, appropriations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The full committee will not meet today.
Judiciary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the House Judiciary Committee will meet for bill hearings starting at 2:30 p.m. Listen for subcommittee announcements, please. Thank you.
Environment and Transportation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Environment and Transportation Committee will continue public hearings at 1:30 p.m.
Ways and Means.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Ways and Means Committee will continue public bill hearings at 1:30 p.m.
Health and Government Operations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Health and Government Operations Committee will meet at 1:45 for bill hearings, 1:45.
And a subcommittee. Oh, I'm sorry. Environment, Economic Matters.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. House Economic Matters Committee will meet for public bill hearings at 1:50. 1:50.
Okay. Any subcommittees? Transportation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Transportation and Environment Subcommittee of Appropriations will meet for a voting session in room 120 at approximately 2:45.
Okay. Civil Law.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Civil Law will meet at 1:05, 15 minutes after we dismiss.
Okay. Education, Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Education and Economic Development Subcommittee of Appropriations will be meeting at 3 p.m. for a voting session in the Appropriations hearing room.
Okay. Public Safety and Administration.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee of Appropriations will meet at 2:30 in room 120 for a voting session.
Family Law.
Family and Juvenile Law will meet at 1:30 today virtually.
Okay. Government Ops and Health Facilities.
Government Operations and Health Facilities will meet as soon as you can log on, and I know you're going to miss lunch, so I'm having food brought in.
Okay. Judiciary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I forgot to mention, after the bill hearings today, we will have a voting session in Judiciary.
Okay. All right. Capital Budget.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The Capital Budget Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee will meet at 4 p.m. today in room 120.
Okay, revenues.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Revenues will meet immediately after bill hearings today.
Real property.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Housing and Real Property Subcommittee will meet today after bill hearings, whenever that is. Stay tuned by Zoom.
Okay. I don't know.
Environment.
Environment. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Environment Subcommittee will meet virtually after bill hearings today.
Public utilities.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Public Utilities will meet tomorrow morning at 09 on Zoom. Additionally, vote change on Amendment 553625 from green to red.
Okay. Insurance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Insurance and Pharmaceutical Subcommittee will be meeting today after bill hearings, whenever that is, and we will also be meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Both meetings are on Zoom.
Any delegation announcements?
Madam Speaker.
Yes.
The Prince George's County House Delegation by County Subcommittee will meet tomorrow morning at 9 on Zoom.
Any other? Okay. Any caucus announcements? No caucus announcements. Personal or guest? You have a.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a vote change.
Oh, okay.
House Bill 547, Amendment 553625-1. I like to go from a yay to a nay.
Okay. All right. Any personal or guest announcements? I see nobody in here. Gentlelady from Montgomery.
Madam Speaker, I apologize. I missed the caucus announcements. The Legislative Black Caucus will meet tomorrow at 8 a.m. on Zoom. We will hear from our superintendent of schools and talk about education issues. Thank you.
Okay. Minority Whip. Majority Whip.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is with the Personnel Subcommittee hat on, and we will be meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. With the whip hat on, I want to remind members that if you are in your seat, you do have to vote. You can't sit and not vote. So I just want to remind members, if you're sitting, you have to press your button. Thank you.
Okay. Health? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I apologize. I missed the subcommittee message. HSS will meet tomorrow at 1:30 for a voting session. Thank you.
Okay. Any other announcements? Okay. Any other personal or guest announcements? Nope. Quorum call before adjournment.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their presence? Clerk will take the call. There being 137 members present, and the House is still in session, recognizing the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the House stands adjourned until Thursday, March 9th at 10 a.m., Legislative Day, March 3rd.